All right, to continue where Professor Ganser left off, we're going to go to Activity 2, the internal anatomy of the heart, using our very well-constructed American Heart Association heart model. All right, here we are with our American Heart Association heart. We're in Activity 2, internal anatomy of the heart. And the first structure or chamber we're going to look at right here is the right atrium. This is going to be the chamber that receives all of the deoxygenated blood that's being brought back to the heart. Superior vena cava here, inferior vena cava here, and then coronary sinus also here. I want to show you the intra-atrial septum right here, and then also a small depression in the wall of the atrium. This is called the fossa ovalis. There was a hole here as you were using mom's lungs to breathe, but as soon as you're born, this hole is closed by a small flap and leaves a small depression, fossa ovalis. I'm then now going to open up this portion of the heart to expose the right ventricle and the tricuspid valve. Tri means 3. If you ever get confused, all you have to do is count the connections. 1, 2, 3. The valve of the heart is anchored to the heart wall by papillary muscles and also supported by these cord-like structures called chordae tendineae. These prevent the valve from prolapsing or closing in on itself. Next, we're going to look at the right ventricle here. You see the right ventricle, and I'm going to grab onto the interventricular septum. It's the wall that separates the right ventricle from the left ventricle, right? So this is the right ventricle here. Deoxygenated blood would follow through. It would drop through the tricuspid valve and would be pumped through the pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk. It would then go on to the lungs and become oxygenated. All right. As blood returns from the lungs, blood is going to enter into the left atrium. And it's going to enter into the left atrium through the pulmonary vein. So as Professor Ganser so eloquently pointed out, there are four pulmonary veins, left and right, 2 on each side, and they're going to be bringing that nice, deep, bright red, oxygenated blood back into the left atrium. From there, blood is going to flow through, unfortunately, our little broken bicuspid valve, otherwise known as the mitral valve. Again, if you ever get confused on your valves, just count the connections. Bi means 2, 1, 2. So you have 2 papillary muscles which are anchoring the valve to the heart wall, and again, you have your chordae tendineae, these string-like cords which prevent the valve from prolapsing. Now that oxygenated blood is in the left ventricle, the left ventricle has the thickest myocardial walls because it needs to pump blood from the heart to the body. And to get to the body, it needs to be pumped through the aortic valve, semilunar valve, where it goes through, and now you're into the ascending aorta, and now you have the choice of going to the right side of the head and neck, or you can go out down to the legs or down to the abdominal cavity. All right, for activity 2, we're going to look at blood supply to the heart, otherwise known as coronary circulation. All right, so here we are back with our American Association heart model, and what I'm going to point out to you is something called the coronary circulation. These are going to be the arteries and veins that are going to feed blood to the heart cells and take blood away from the heart cells. So let's start on the arterial side. And the 2 largest arteries on the anterior surface of the heart are both going to originate from the aorta. Let's start here on the right side. All right, I'm going to pull this flap back, and you can clearly see on the right side of the heart, this artery right here is the right coronary artery. The right coronary artery is going to originate off of the aortic arch, and it's just going to follow down the right side of the heart. Now, at some point, the right coronary artery is going to give rise to the marginal artery. Now, your heart is very different than my heart, so who's to say where the marginal artery would originate? But just think of the margin of a page as the edge of the page. So the marginal artery is going to be this artery that kind of goes down the edge of the heart here. So right coronary into the right marginal. Now let's come over to the left side of the heart, and I want to point out the left coronary artery. Now, this little tiny sliver right here, this is the only portion of the left coronary artery that you can see. You have to use your imagination and pretend that it's going to go behind the pulmonary trunk. So behind, so dot, 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 hidden, hidden, hidden. It would, though, originate from the aortic arch here, right? So this is the left coronary artery. All right, so here we have our Big Bertha heart, and like I said, the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery are both going to originate off of the ascending aorta, but on the American Heart Association heart, you can't see that. But if I take this section of the heart and peel it away, then voila, we have the origination point of the right coronary artery and the origination point of the left coronary artery. All right, so I'm going to set this large heart aside. We're going to go back to our American Heart Association heart, and I am going to now point out this special point right here. This is the bifurcation point where two arteries are going to arise from our left coronary artery. The first artery is going to be called the circumflex. Think circumference of a circle goes all the way around. So this artery here is the circumflex. Let me take it off the stand and I'll show you what I mean. Circumflex all the way around. See how it goes all the way around the posterior portion of the heart, and it will eventually join and kind of fuse into one with the right coronary artery. So that's the circumflex. All right, this artery here is called the left anterior descending artery, or the LAD. The other name is the anterior interventricular artery. I'm impressed that I remembered that. All right, so those are the anterior arteries. So just for review, right coronary, this tiny sliver here is the left coronary. This artery here is the circumflex. This artery here, this is the largest of all the coronary arteries. This is the left anterior descending. And it's especially important because, look, it's going to feed those myocardial cells of the left ventricle. All right, there is one artery to point out on the posterior portion of the heart. This would be the posterior interventricular artery here. So those are all the coronary arteries. Let's go back to the anterior surface of the heart and let's point out the great cardiac vein. So this large vein, which lays right on top of or lays with the LAD, is the great cardiac vein. Okay, so again, we're on the posterior surface of the heart, and we have the middle cardiac vein, which runs right alongside the posterior interventricular artery. I also want to point out that the posterior interventricular artery would form an anastomosis or join with the anterior interventricular artery, but you would also know that as the LAD. So right here, there would be a connection or anastomosis, which means connection between those two vessels. I also do want to point out the venous anastomoses of all these different veins. So all these different veins are going to join here. They're all going to join, and they're going to form this large collection area here called the coronary sinus. This is where all of this deoxygenated blood that has been returning from these heart cells is going to confluence, and this is where right here it's going to enter into the right atrium. So this little red dot is where the coronary sinus is going to dump its deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. And that is coronary circulation.
All right, looking at the coronary artery bypass graft surgery, or CABG, your instructions here say that there's a blockage in the proximal LAD, and we need to fix this. So we're going to pretend to be heart surgeons today. So remember, coming off of the ascending aorta, you have this left coronary artery here, and the left coronary artery bifurcates into the LAD coming down the anterior surface along the interventricular septum, going down the left ventricle here, and the circumflex artery. So remember that proximal means close to the origin. So the LAD is going to originate at this bifurcation. Above this bifurcation is not the LAD. This is the left coronary artery. The LAD begins when there's a fork in the road at the bifurcation. Now it's the LAD. So a blockage in proximal LAD means it's going to be close to that point of origin or close to the bifurcation there. So if we have a blockage here in the coronary artery, specifically the LAD, I'm going to put my finger where that blockage is. In fact, I'm going to go to a little sticker and stick it there for you. All right, so I'm going to put a little sticker right where that blockage would be. So now blood's coming from the ascending aorta, trying to feed the heart some oxygen and nutrients, coming down the left coronary artery. Some of it can go over to the circumflex just fine, and the blood that's trying to get down the LAD can't. There's a blockage. There it is. So now all the heart tissue downstream, mainly the left ventricle here, is not going to be getting any freshly oxygenated blood. So we need to go around this blockage. So we take some tubing. Luckily there's a hole here. That's not an anatomical hole, it's just for the model so we can stick the tubing in there. And we can attach that tubing somewhere else. So now, freshly oxygenated blood traveling through the aorta, ascending an aortic arch, is going to travel through this tube and replenish blood flow to the left anterior descending, or LAD, artery. So we went around the block. The block was here, and we just went around it. We bypassed it to replenish blood supply to that tissue. The second problem we have following your lab is a blockage in the proximal right coronary artery. So let's look at the model here. Here's the right coronary artery coming down, and there's a blockage somewhere here in the proximal, again meaning close to the point of origin. So I'm going to put another little sticker representing a blockage somewhere around here. Now exactly where, we don't know. But the only place for me to add a tube on this model, just by the way it was cast, is right here. So I'm going to put the blockage here. It really could be anywhere along here. But there's a blockage somewhere in the proximal right coronary artery. So blood flow is coming down the right coronary artery, and it can't get past that blockage. This tissue is going to start to die if it can't get freshly oxygenated blood. So we need to go around that blockage, bypass it. So I'm going to attach some tubing here. And now freshly oxygenated blood is going to travel from the aorta through this tubing here and now replenish the blood supply to the right side of the heart. So we just bypassed or went around that blockage. Now just for fun, I'm going to give you a what if scenario. This is not in your lab, but it's fun. So follow along. Instead of having the blockage here in the proximal LAD, if I say the blockage is instead at the distal portion of the left coronary artery, remember before this bifurcation is the left coronary artery. If I just move that blockage up a centimeter, does this procedure that we already performed still save this patient's life? So think about it just for a second. Okay. If blood flow from the aorta coming down the left coronary artery comes down this way and is blocked, blood can't get past this green sticker. By the surgery we have already performed, we are going around the blockage to resurface the LAD. However, because the blockage is above this bifurcation, we've serviced the LAD, so the LAD can now have adequate blood flow. But the circumflex is still lacking blood flow. So in this case, because the blockage is in the distal left coronary artery, we need to service blood either just below that blockage before the bifurcation, or you need to have two bypass here, one to replenish blood to the LAD and the other to replenish blood to the circumflex.